Here's a video about how to make a release of Tectonic or some of the Tectonic crates using Cranko. So I'm in the Tectonic repository. I've got a clean checkout on the main branch. And when things are working well, there's only a few steps involved. So basically, the first command, assuming that you have Cranko installed, is Cranko stage. Actually, let's run Cranko status first. So what this will do is this will analyze all of the projects in the repository, and there's one project for each crate, of which there's quite a number. And it will tell you a little summary of what has changed. In this case, it's quite a lot since it's been a long time since we've had a release. So this is saying, okay, the Tectonic XDV release crate has had 10 commits since its last release. And so these numbers are all based on just kind of looking at file system prefixes. So they might be a little bit fuzzy, but they'll give you the right kind of, they should give you a ballpark number. So we can release one or some or all of these crates in one go, probably while working on sort of checking the workflow and stuff. It'd probably be wise to start with a few and kind of do it in dependency order. So to actually make a release, the next step that we would do is we would do a Cranko stage. Let me just print out the help here. So we can run Cranko stage, and it will basically, we'll give it one of these crate names, project names, and we can choose a specific one that we want to work on the release for, or if we give it no arguments, we'll try and release all of them. So to keep things tractable, let's try and stage just one, maybe something pretty low level, so we'll do like that. And so here Cranko is doing some analysis of the Git history and stuff. So what actually happens when we do this is really all that happens is Cranko rewrites this changelog file. And the next steps, Cranko is just looking at changes to these changelog files to tell what is being released for the next step. So if I do a Cranko stage without arguments, it will process everything, and it will rewrite all of those changelogs. And in fact, it will create some new ones because there's some new crates that have been created. But for these purposes, I'll get rid of all those and go back to staging just the one. So when we do that, if we burrow into here, so what happens is Cranko is basically, it's copying old changelog material, and then it's adding new changelog material at the top in a new section in Markdown, where it basically has a bullet list for every relevant commit. And so this is just like the first line of the relevant Git commit. So the part where you, the human, have to make some decisions when you're making a release is writing up the release notes to something that like an actual human would want to read. And also this first line is magical. This has a special syntax where what this says is when we release this crate, we will do a micro bump of the version number. So it would go from 0.1.1 to 0.1.2. This can also be minor bump or major bump as appropriate. So for Tectonic, we use semantic versioning, where a micro bump should be for bug fixes, a minor bump should be used for new APIs, and a major bump would be for breaking API changes, which were sort of, it's not clear whether that would ever be relevant. So in this particular case, so as the changes here are basically like not really related to the code per se, which is, you might still want to make a release out of a package that hasn't had any code changes. Things like updating the edition or updating dependency versions, things like these lints, that could all be good reason to make a release. Here, like at this point, I would go and write the If you just want to kind of use these Git summaries, those aren't great release notes, but there's a lot of release notes to write. Like, it's not the worst thing in the world. Or I try and add links, references to things like pull requests and people who did things, and try and add more information like that. And I'll show, if I go back here and stage the mainline Tectonic crate, which has the most thorough release notes. If we go up here, you can see, so this, here's a whole bunch of commits, and previous release notes have links that I embed to the GitHub pull requests and things like that. This is sort of like the extra credit version. Also note that, so what happens is when you finally make the release, Cranko will replace this magic string with text like this that includes the crate name, the version number, the date. So this is sort of like, it's basically a hack of, when we want to make a release, we want to automate a lot of stuff, but we do want, a human should write the release notes and decide what kind of version bump we're talking about, or specifically like, what the new version should be. And so part of the Cranko model is basically this special kind of intermediate changelog format delivers that information to the CI system, which is then where the tool actually processes that and acts on it. So I might add like a new header comment like, all right. So at that point, so like if I were to run the next command, which would be Cranko confirm at this point, it would plan to make 2 releases, one of the depth support crate and one of the mainline crate. I don't want to do that, or I won't do it at all, but in this example where we only want to do the depth support crate, so just restoring that changelog is, I should say that git as a shorthand for git status. Just restoring that changelog is enough to tell Cranko to forget about making a release of that crate. So the next command is Cranko confirm. So this is after you've written all your release notes. What it's doing is essentially taking that changelog and sort of parsing it, checking that makes sense, and then creating a special commit on the local RC branch. So RC is like release candidate. And now if I look at the status, it has cleaned up that change. So what I wrote in those release notes is now been sort of warped into the special commit on this RC branch. And if I show this head commit, so it's a merge commit. It includes what I wrote in the release notes, and it also includes some metadata that will be parsed by the system on the CI side of things. But you don't really like the confirm command. So in this case, it has a bunch of warnings because there's a bunch of unreleased changes, which is something that we know and expect. Here it does tell me what the plan is, so the micro bump. So this is an expected change because in principle, like maybe I will, if someone else somehow manages to make a release before I do and I create a new RC commit, maybe we're at 0.1.4 somehow, and talking about it in terms of the bump as opposed to the target version number helps you be more resilient to kind of concurrency in the release process. Anyway, so what I would do to actually make the release happen at this point would simply be to push the RC branch or push it to the Tectonic repo. So at that point, what would take over would be on the CI side. And there, when a change goes to the RC branch, what should happen is it should do a regular build and test, but sort of building in that version number for that newly released dev support crate. So it would build it as version 0.1.2, it would run all the tests, and assuming those worked, it would then go to the extra deployment step of automatically, so it would push a tag, It would create a tag and push it to GitHub. So you can see we've got lots and lots of tags for all the releases. It would push a release to the GitHub releases page. It would push a release to Cargo. It would do all these things that can be automated once we have established the baseline of giving it the release notes and the version bump. From there on else, like everything downstream from that, the goal is to make it automatable. To do more releases, we would just run Cranko stage with more packages, more crates, or staging all of them with this many unreleased changes. I would not recommend that. But in principle, you could write all of these release notes and push them all in one giant commit. And adding the new change logs and pushing them, I believe, should do everything that you need to do to release the new packages. I think here, I think a micro bump, the sort of start release version would be 0.0.0. So this would bring you to 0.0.1. You can also write force and a version number to force a specific version number, but that's something that should only be needed in special situations. So that's basically all there is to it. Most of the effort is ideally in setting up the CI. Hopefully that's all in good working order. And then at that point, running the releases. So the whole goal of Cranko is to the human has to do the things that the human should do, which is, I believe, drafting those release notes, choosing the version number. So you might, you review the changes and think about them. And, did we break an API? Did we add a new feature? That's the stuff that you need to decide. And then this sort of the whole point of Cranko, one way you can think about it, is essentially getting that information into the CI system where it could then act on it in an automated way, and where as much as possible can happen on the CI side of things. But there is one more little wrinkle that I want to mention, especially with all the changes that I've gone here. So with a complex system like Tectonic, so a crate like the main crate depends on virtually all of these. And one thing that becomes tricky is that so the way that Tectonic does this versioning on the fly is it says, within the repo, we don't worry about version numbers. We just call everything 0. So that means that when we're sort of, we don't have this issue that you find in a lot of existing, if I just write the version number of, okay, the current version is 1.2.3, I might have a whole series of pull requests where every commit says version 1.2.3. And really only one of those commits should correspond to 1.2.3. The rest are some kind of intermediate thing. And the way that Cranko solves this problem is it says, okay, the only time that this version is not 0 is when we're doing one of these releases. But the problem that emerges is if we have these internal dependencies. So at any given commit, the version of the main Tectonic crate should be compatible with the Tectonic errors crate or all these other crates. But when we push those out in the outside world, the dependency needs to be something else, because the main Tectonic crate might be compatible with Tectonic errors greater than 1.1. And it's kind of not accurate. Say I make a release of everything all at once, the first approximation would be the main Tectonic crate requires the very newest version of all these crates. But that might not actually be true. The version 1.7 of Tectonic could be compatible with version 1.2 of Tectonic errors. So it turns out in order to really capture that, we have this extra set of metadata, which is down in here, this package metadata internal depth versions. And so what this is capturing is that compatibility, but because essentially in the repo we don't have version numbers to refer to, we have to refer to commit IDs. So what this line is saying is that the current version of the main Tectonic crate is compatible with any version of Tectonic errors that includes this commit in its history. And so when Cranko is doing its processing, it basically takes that commit ID, figures out what actual concrete version number it corresponds to, and uses that to write the correct dependency in the package metadata as it releases them. So what this means is that when you are making releases, ideally you want to go to the effort to make sure that all these dependencies are correct, in the sense that if Engine ZTech added a new API that is now needed by the main Tectonic crate, this needs to change to indicate that we need whatever that more recent release is with a more recent commit. And say, for instance, that now the mainline Tectonic crate needs the very latest commit of Engine ZTech. If I try to release Tectonic without releasing Engine ZTech, Cranko will yell at me because Tectonic 1.12 needs Engine ZTech 1.12, but you haven't actually released that yet. Like, we can't, it is not possible to install that package using only releases. So there's some safety in there that will prevent that. So ideally, like, as you're adding APIs, like if I'm doing development and I add a new feature to Engine ZTech, then when I do that, I should always take care to update these internal dep versions in the depending packages as appropriate. So if I add a new API to errors and then bundles uses it, but doc model doesn't, then bundles needs its requirement bumped, but doc model doesn't. Finally, that a lot of these lines say this commit blah blah blah. So this is just a convenience thing in Cranko, where this special string basically says, instead of some full-on git commit hash, Cranko will basically do a git blame and identify which commit added this text to this file, and it will say that commit is the one that is, it will map it to whatever commit ID that is. So it's like when I'm doing a pull request and I add this new API, when I'm writing that commit, I don't know the ID of that commit. But by using the little this commit syntax, I can say, okay, mainline, main Tectonic crate requires whichever version of Tectonic bundles added this particular line. So if I do that blame, it'll be, okay, this is the commit that it requires. And there's a little helper called Cranko show TC tag, which will print out all these lines with today's date. And then you need a randomizer, because otherwise, if you just said this commit and date, if there were multiple lines with that same date, you might get confused about which commit exactly you're talking about. But when you add a little randomization, then it becomes robust, or at least as robust as you can practically hope for. So if you don't make these changes, that means that the published crates, like maybe the mainline Tectonic crate needs some new API and that's not captured in the crates.io metadata. It's not the end of the world, but it's not great. So this is kind of a thing, it can be a little tedious, like, especially if it's been a while since there have been releases, like if you haven't been fastidious about keeping these things updated. The easiest thing might be just to bulk update nearly everything, and just say, okay, let's just, it's sort of the most conservative possible approach is just say, okay, everything needs the absolute latest release. That, maybe you could have actually gotten away with a slightly less stringent requirement. But, the only harm is someone who wants to install a slightly older version has to upgrade that dependency to a slightly newer version. So I think that covers all of it. The hassle is if the CI part doesn't work, but the existing plumbing has been working reliably, and it's a little bit tedious to set up, but the nice thing is once it works, it generally, stuff just breaks in CI periodically. That's just kind of how it is. Um, but generally, it can keep on working well. And one last thing I'll say is, so if it does break, you kind of have to get yourself into a bit of an unusual mental model of essentially like, you might need to fix something in the workflow scripts or whatever. So there might be kind of a pull request to fix that, and then you just sort of make a release again. And I often write a release note like, if the failed release didn't create a new tag, didn't like work at all, then that release didn't really happen. If it did create a new tag, then it did happen, and so you might make a micro bump and say no code changes, just fixing the release metadata. So you can get into a sort of situation where maybe the GitHub tag got updated, but the crates.io release didn't work. So it's basically a busted release. But the existence of that tag is the thing that, as far as Cranko is concerned, tells you whether the release actually happened or not. So you might need to do this thing where you kind of create like 4 releases in a row, just wiring out the issues with the CI pipeline, which is definitely a little annoying, but also, the whole point of the automation is like doing that is fine. And, in terms of the resources that you're using up or whatever, people are pretty much always moving to the latest release. So it really, it's slightly inefficient, but it's just really nothing to worry about. Which is a nice thing of like, once you get in the automation mindset, like, okay, I have to make 12 releases now, can be a very easy thing. One very last thing that I'll mention is if you write up release notes and you make a release and it doesn't work at all, you're going to want to like Cranko stage again. And unfortunately, there's no like super convenient way if you've like put a lot of effort into writing those release notes. When you commit or when you confirm the staging, they all kind of disappear into the RC commit. And if you need to re-stage, it's not super like, in order to get those notes out, you kind of have to look at that RC commit and pull out the content. Where I think there's like a git restore, you can give it like a branch and a file name. Don't trust me on the syntax, but you can do something like that, and you can kind of like pull out the file as it appears in the RC, which would be sort of one. Or what I often end up doing is I'll just do like a git show and copy paste, which is really, it's not great because this, for implementation reasons, it's a merge commit, so you get to kind of like double diff format. But anyway, it's a little bit tedious. Cranko could gain some kind of command to make that a little bit easier, but hopefully it won't come up too often. So anything else? I guess I'll make another video. Hopefully the Cranko book will be helpful, and hopefully the CI will work. And I think that's it for now. Happy releasing.